Hey guys, good to see you. Stephanie, glad you could make it. I know it was really short notice. Nisi, good to see you as well. Hey Jealousy, I've not seen you in a while. I'm glad to see a couple of you have already voted. How long does it take to develop symptoms of gonorrhea? Is it 2 days, 2 months, 2 years, all of the above? It's quite an important question. As we go through the timeline of the letters, I want you to think about that question. In other words, what is Vincent doing that we don't know about? Does he have a STD that we don't know about? Also, is he kind of this clean living fellow, and then he falls in love with Key Voss? He's rejected, and then he goes over to the dark side, if you want to call it that. Or has he been doing that anyway? Has he been sort of doing that all along? If he has, then you could kind of make the argument that Key Voss was totally justified in rejecting his advances, right? He's not a dirty old man, he's actually already a dirty young man kind of thing. The thing that I just want to kind of put on your radar is within 6 months of his romance with Key Voss, he's got gonorrhea, right? It's quite something. Okay, Timmy. Timmy, do you know you're a little opportunist? So I'm going to deal with this book a little bit later. I've just picked Timmy up, so there is something I want to read from there. I'll do it a little bit later. I do want to make some progress with these letters. Wow, are you already snoring? Let's just have a look at some of your comments. Stephanie says, hey Jealousy, I've been missing you. Glad you're here and that you did your due diligence by voting. Okay, guys, so I'm going to get started. I just want to try and make some progress in this episode, and hopefully we can get as close to June 1882 as possible. As I say, think about, hey Terry, good to see you. Terry, have you got your notebook handy? If you are listening and if you kind of following me through this, the thing to think about is, again, this idea of when does he get gonorrhea? Has he had it does he already have it? Because bear in mind, you can actually have gonorrhea for years before you show symptoms. Does he get it shortly before he goes to hospital? Remember, when he goes to hospital, he's actually seriously sick, right? And so that's 6 months after kind of where we are now. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind. The other thing I want you to keep in the back of your mind is Vincent like you have this idea that he's an innocent fellow, he's a sweet chap, right? And I think he's all those things. He's a cultured fellow, he's a genius in a sense, he's a well brought up young man, but he also has certain flaws and certain weaknesses, right? So it's important to see it that way, and also to look at gonorrhea it's not so simple. It's not like you have it 2 days later or you have it 2 years later. It's actually unclear. We don't know what the answer is. And that's why you've got to ask yourself this question, what is likely, what is going on? And in a way, you want to draw some of that intuition from his own words, right? And that's what we're going to do now. So we're now at November 1881. He's going to be going into the hospital for gonorrhea in June 1882. And so from his letters, you want to kind of get an idea, when does he go what is he doing, and also in terms of his health. When does he talk about not feeling very well? Stephanie says he can be. He is many things. Hi, Margie. Hi, Karina from Austria. Good to see you. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So this is halfway through the very important letter he wrote to Theo from Eton in the 3rd November, 1881. We got through around about half the letter, and it was quite a surprising letter, probably from Theo's perspective. His brother telling him, I'm in love, I'm hopelessly in love, and there's a big drama at home, and blah, 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 blah. So this is kind of the last third of that letter. He writes, Theo, are you by any chance in love as well? I hope you are, for believe me, even petite misère, I think that means a small bit of misery has their value. I think he means even a short little love affair has their value. One is sometimes in despair. There are moments when one is in hell, so to speak, yet there's also something different and better about it. That seems a bit like someone who's speaking from experience, doesn't it? In other words, that he's been infatuated quite a few times, that he's had a few feelings of, attraction, and he's had some experience approaching the opposite sex and so on, right? And then he tells his brother that there are 3 stages in terms of love. He says the first stage is not loving and not being loved. Number 2, loving and not being loved. And he says in brackets there, the present case. So that's where he finds himself right now, loving someone and not being loved back. And then thirdly, loving and being loved. And then he says, now I tell you that the second stage is better than the first, but the third, ! That's it. That's the stage you want to be in, loving and being loved. He says, well, old boy, go and fall in love yourself and tell me about it sometime. Keep your own counsel in the present case and have some sympathy for me. Of course, I would much rather have had a yea and amen, but I am almost pleased with my never, no, never. I take it for something, although old and wiser heads say it is nothing. In other words, he's saying, a woman saying to him, never, no, never, is actually so almost strident. He actually somehow sees some hope in that. It's so assertive that he feels like it's kind of overdone. And so there is actually something there. I remember as a young man saying something like, which is quite funny, if I was attracted to someone and they said, well, I can't remember if I said this to someone else or if in terms of another guy, or if I said it to a woman that wasn't interested in me. But I think I said something like, it's much better if you are totally turned off or revolted or disgusted or extremely upset, because that actually means you're feeling something, than if you actually feel absolutely nothing. And that you, in other words, there's like not even a blip on the radar. So the fact that your presence elicits strong feelings may mean that there is actually something going on there. So I don't know, it kind of rings a bell with what he's saying here. In other words, and obviously this is a somewhat naive, idealistic, young, youthful approach to love, but it's kind of this idea of, if someone is indifferent to you, that's a problem. But if someone is repelled, if they have strong feelings of any kind, whether it's positive or negative, that probably indicates the potential for something, right? Anyway, I mean, I was actually watching Star Wars, one of the old Star Wars, and I don't know if you guys remember, Princess Leia is really not playing hard to get, but she seems like she really doesn't like Han Solo, especially in Empire Strikes Back, to the extent that she sort of kisses Luke and I don't know, does all that kind of thing. The point being, her apparent disgust actually does hide feelings of attraction. Of course, that was like the 70s. I don't know if that's still true today. Stephanie says he forgot about loving and letting go. Anyway, he says Rapard has been here and brought some watercolors that are coming on well. Mauve will be calling soon, I hope. Otherwise, I shall go to him. Now, one does wonder, does Vincent's rubbing shoulders with these other artists, is that kind of reminding him, is he being swept into certain circles, and through that realizing that, well, there's this other world out there? And make no mistake, in the Netherlands of this period, artists did have a particular lifestyle, and perhaps that's also why Van Gogh really enjoyed that part of being an artist. Obviously, when he was in Paris, that would sort of go up a gear as well. Stacey says, I still have a wrench. Yes, you do. Okay, so not that you need it here, though. So he goes on to say, I'm doing a good deal of drawing and have the feeling it is improving. I'm working much more with a brush than before. It is so cold now. Bear in mind, November in the Netherlands is winter. By the way, where I am right now, it is the coldest day so far this year. I've actually just before I came on, I wrapped up my delicious monster in kind of a netting, because tomorrow is going to be extremely cold, well below zero. Anyway, it goes on to say, it is so cold now that I do almost nothing but indoor figure drawing, a seamstress, a basket weaver, etc. And those are obviously women that is drawing. A handshake in my thoughts and write soon, and believe me, ever yours, Vincent. And then he adds this postscript. If you ever do fall in love and get a never, don't resign yourself to it, whatever you do. But you are such a lucky dog that nothing like that will ever happen to you, I hope. I think he did have a little bit of difficulty winning Joe's love. I don't think that was it wasn't necessarily an easy romance for Theo. She had a couple of reservations, but ultimately it wasn't no, never no. Anyway, it goes on to say, they tried to make me promise that I would speak or write absolutely nothing more about this business, but I refused to promise that. In my opinion, no one in the world should in fairness demand such a thing of me or of anyone else in the same position. All I did was to give Uncle Sant the assurance that for the time being I would cease writing to Uncle Stricker unless unforeseen circumstances should necessitate it. A lark cannot help singing in the spring. So at this point, Vincent is 28 years old. Something that I think's quite interesting is his relationship with his father. His relationship with God is also not very good. And I think those go hand in hand. I think at the same time that his relationship with his father hits sort of rough water, his relationship with God is also different. And I think there's an interesting relationship there. Okay, so now we go on to the next letter. We go from 3rd of November to 7th of November. Vincent to Theo from Eton. And he starts it off, old boy, this letter is for you alone. You will keep it to yourself, won't you? I should not be surprised, Theo, if my last letter made a somewhat strange impression on you, but I hope the impression has been such as to give you some idea of the whole situation. I tried to indicate the proportions and planes with long, straight charcoal strokes. When the necessary auxiliary lines have been traced, then we brush off the charcoal with a handkerchief or a wing and begin to draw the more intimate details. So this letter will be written in a more intimate, less harsh and angular tone than the former. So he's kind of promising in this letter to give more details about his feelings. He says, in the first place, I must ask you if it astonishes you at all that there is a love serious and passionate enough not to be chilled even by many never, no, never. So he's kind of assuring his brother that this love is the real thing. And I think what he really wants to happen is for Theo to kind of come to support him and to, in some way, influence his family. Something I wanted to say a moment ago is this is kind of the letter writing version and the 19th century version of being blocked on Twitter or Facebook. It's like his parents saying, do not write any letters to Kivos. That's kind of like trying to block him off in that sense. And so he writes to his brother. Then he says, I suppose far from astonishing you, this will seem very natural and reasonable. So he's trying to kind of influence his brother to say, you know what I'm going through is completely normal and it's actually quite wonderful, right? And it should be encouraged. And so almost in the same way that he was talking about God is sort of religious fervor, it's now turned to sort of a fervor about love, right? And so he says, it's almost like he's preaching a sermon. He says, for love is something so positive, so strong, so real that it is as impossible for one who loves to take back that feeling as it is to take his own life. Now, there is a reference to how impossible it is to commit suicide, by the way. He says, for love is something so positive, so strong, so real that it is as impossible for one who loves to take back that feeling as it is to take his own life. Interesting, isn't it? He says, if you reply to this by saying, but there are people who put an end to their own life, I simply answer, I really do not think I am a man with such inclinations. That's a powerful statement. There's a statement in his own words saying, I'm not the kind of man who would take my own life. So I'm going to put this statement in chat just so you can have a good look at it. And there's the first half of it. And here's the second half. So if you weren't sure of Van Gogh's attitude to suicide, that should clarify it. Stephanie says, I've lived so much life since the age he passed. Yeah. Okay, so he goes on to say, life has become very dear to me and I'm very glad that I love. My life and my love are one, but you are faced with a never, no, never is your reply. My answer to that is, old boy, for the present I look upon that no, never, no, never, no, never as a block of ice which I press to my heart to thaw. To determine which will win, the coldness of that block of ice or the warmth of my heart, that is the delicate question about which I can give no information as yet. And I wish that other people would not talk about it if they can say nothing better than the ice will not thaw, foolishness, and more such nice insinuations. We've actually covered this before. He says, if I had an iceberg from Greenland or Nova Zembla before me, I do not know how many meters high, thick, or wide, then it would be a different case. To clasp that colossus and press it to my heart to thaw it. But he says, as I've never yet seen an ice colossus of such dimensions loom up across my course, I repeat, seeing that she, with her never, no, never, and all is not many meters, in other words, he's kind of saying her resistance is actually quite small. He's kind of putting her in a sort of a sense of scale, a sense of perspective. And he's saying her resistance is actually quite minimal, I guess, right? It's not impossible, right? And then he says, as for me, I press the block of ice, never, no, never, to my heart. I've no other choice. And if I try to make it thaw and disappear, who can object to that? What physical science has taught them that ice cannot be thawed is a puzzle to me. It is very sad that there are so many people who object to it, but I do not intend to get melancholy over it and lose my courage. Far from it. So there's also his attitude to rejection. Is this a guy who quickly loses his temper? Is it a guy who quickly gets depressed? Well, that is his attitude. He says, I'm not going to get depressed over it. Then he says, let those be melancholy who will. I have had enough of it and will only be glad as a lark in spring. I will sing no other song. Theo, do you like that Never No Never? Indeed, I think you don't. But there seem to be people who like it and perhaps unconsciously, of course with the best intentions and for my own good, they occupy themselves with trying to wrench the ice from my breast. Unconsciously, they throw more cold water on my ardent love than they are aware. But I do not think many pails of cold water will be able to cool my love soon, old boy. Do you think it considerate of the family to insinuate that I must be prepared to hear in a short time that she has accepted another, richer suitor, that she has become quite handsome and will no doubt be asked in marriage? So he's kind of seems to be suggesting that the reason he's not good enough is because he doesn't have money, which I think is part of the equation. But yeah, not the full equation. And then he says, she will take a positive dislike to me if I go further than brother and sister. That was the utmost limit, that it would be such a pity if meanwhile I let a better chance go by. Does a man who has not learned to say she and no other know what love is? When they said those things to me, then I felt with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, she and no other. It's pretty deep stuff, isn't it? Perhaps some will say you show weakness, passion, stupidity, ignorance of the world when you say she and no other. Add another string to your bow. Do not commit yourself definitely. Far from it. Let this, my weakness, be my strength. I will be dependent on her and no other. Even if I could, I should not want to be independent of her. So it's all pretty big talk. It's quite impressive, how ardent he is. But of course, just a couple of months from now, he's going to be living with a pregnant prostitute and her son or daughter. I'm not quite sure if it's, but anyway, and her child. So you kind of got to wonder if the Van Gogh family knew what was waiting for them in the future. Like if someone could tell them, well, by the way, if you don't let Vincent have this relationship, he's going to end up with a pregnant prostitute. How do you feel about that? Well, they may have said, well, then definitely not. But someone else may have thought, cheapers, that is going to be hard to bear. How bad is it, after all, being with one's cousin, kind of thing? Anyway, it's quite an interesting dynamic. And she wouldn't be the only one, by the way. Anyway, he goes on to say, I saw that she was always thinking of the past and buried herself in it with devotion. Then I thought, though I respect that feeling and though that deep grief of hers touches and moves me, yet I think there is some fatalism in it. So it must not weaken my heart, but I must be resolute and firm, like a steel blade. I will try to raise something new, which will not take the place of the old, but sorry about that. Which will not take the place of the old, but has a right to a place of its own. I wonder whether I've got a slight cold. Timmy, can you get off? Okay. And then I began at first crudely, awkwardly, but still firmly, and I ended with the words, key, I love you as myself. Then she said, never, no, never. What is the opposite of never, no, never? I cannot say who will win. God knows, I only know this one thing. I'd better stick to my faith. When it happened this summer, though I was not unprepared for it, It was at first as terrible a blow as a death sentence, and for a moment it absolutely crushed me to the ground. Then, in that inexpressible anguish of soul, a thought rose in me like a clear light in the night. Whosoever can resign himself, let him do so. But he who has faith, let him believe. So now he's kind of almost translating his faith in God to faith in love, in a way. Then he says, then I arose, not resigning, but believing, and had no other thought than she and no other. You will say, on what will you live if you win her? Or perhaps you will not win her, but no, you will not talk like that. He who loves lives, he who lives works, he who works is bread. So I remain calm and confident through all this, and it influences my work, which attracts me more than ever, just because I feel I shall succeed. Not that I shall become anything extraordinary, but ordinary, and by ordinary I mean that my work will be sound and reasonable, and will have a right to exist, and will serve some purpose. Now remember, we're looking at this from the benefit of history. So we know that Vincent becomes world famous. We know that Vincent achieves an incredible legacy, and we may look at this situation almost in a with a feeling of humor and amusement, but within his life, without that legacy, I think he felt like he was treading water in a way. At this point, he may have felt that there was some chance of love, but after repeated rejections, I think he must have felt that his ability to have the relationships that he wanted was, in other words, his social power was actually quite weak. Does that make sense? So it is quite interesting where he says, not that I shall become anything extraordinary. And of course he does. He becomes incredibly extraordinary and incredibly unique kind of thing. Then he says, I think that nothing awakens us to the reality of life so much as true love. I think that's very true. I think any young person, until they've fallen in love and things haven't worked out, hasn't really gotten a sense of what life is all about. When you really, really want someone, you really have this idea of, you have this vision for yourself, and someone else is part of that vision, except they don't want to be part of it. They don't want you to be part of their vision. That's part of the conundrum of being alive, you know. And part of that is where you realize, you see me as that, right? I see you as this, but you see me as that, right? And is it true? Maybe it is. Anyway, he goes on to say, but to what shall I compare that peculiar feeling, that peculiar discovery of love? For indeed, when a man falls seriously in love, it is the discovery of a new hemisphere. And therefore I wish that you were in love too. But then a woman must come into your life, however, as with other things, who seeks will find, though the finding itself is due simply to luck, not to any merit of our own. And then it is a great surprise when you have found someone, and it says the word "and" 3 times. If you then find yourself faced not with a yes and amen, but with a never, no, never, it is not pleasant at first, but terrible. But as Uncle Jan rightly says, the devil is never so black as he is painted. So it is also with a never, no, never. So he's kind of saying, although the never, no, never is this dark cloud, maybe there is a silver lining to it, right? Then he says, now when you have received and read this letter, you must surely write me soon, if you haven't already done so. For since I've told you everything, I long very much for a letter from you. I do not think you will take what I've told you in bad part, but rather that you have pretty much the same thoughts about the question of the necessity of a she and no other in general. However it may be, write to me soon and believe me, yours sincerely, Vincent. What is quite interesting about that letter is there's not really a single reference to anything that is drawing. That entire letter is just about love, right? I'm saying that there's not a sketch in that drawing. There's not a reference to anything that it is drawing. It's definitely quite interesting. So I'm going to read another letter. Wow, this is extremely long. I think before I read this letter, I want to refer to this book again. It's on page 34, and it's a section titled Art and Responsibility, Commitments for the Future. And yeah, you can see some of the portraits that he's doing and that he's done. Those are some of the people that is painted. And then it says the following. It's kind of going a little bit further forward in time. Strangely enough, this book doesn't deal much with 1882. There's not much about that. Anyway, so this quoting from the book, quote, "The 20 months Van Gogh had spent with a woman were not without consequences." And this is obviously not Guy Voss. With his plans for family life in ruins and his future, he believed, gloomy, he felt he was in a corner. But the fact of it was that his oppressive sense of responsibility for every living creature under the sun underwent a change during his time with Scene. Scene is the woman that he kind of intensely loved after Guy Voss, right? She was the prostitute. Now, I think you've got to think about also Van Gogh's not just in love with a woman, is in love with the idea of starting a family, having children. And it's a very intense feeling. And then when it passes, he sort of, I don't think it ever completely passes, but he never ultimately does get married and he never ultimately does have children. And although that's great for the art world, again, one's got to wonder, what if he did, if things did work out with Guy Voss? Would he have lived longer? Would we have continued to get letters from Vincent to Theo? Would his art have gone a different path? Would Guy Voss have said, stop painting and start something else, right? Probably that would have been different. Who knows, though? Anyway, so it goes on to say, it was as if Van Gogh had needed the family experience as a focus for his devotional impulses, and now he was better able to master his overgenerous tendencies. Now he directed them towards his art and concentrated in his paintings the energy he had hitherto been scattering. The way he saw himself as an artist became clearer too. Poverty prompted him to develop a concept of art for the underprivileged. His daily toil at his art brought home to him the toughness, but also the dignity of the craftsman's life. Do you get that? So because he's poor and struggling, he's become a tougher human being, right? Under constant pressure to earn money, his life came to resemble that of a piece worker, and Van Gogh now felt his life as an artist would be lived in a spirit of solidarity with the working classes, with a craftsman's ethic, and with the speed of production and end in itself. Now, I must say, when I was writing the first 20, 30, 40 books in a very prolific period where I ended up writing over 100 books, I was also that very, very poor artist. And because of that poverty, because of that sense of struggle, I could really understand the victims, the silenced victims, the helplessness of victims, the dependency, the vulnerability the weakness of victims in certain true crime situations. I felt that in particular with Reeva Steenkamp, who was also a freelance of sorts, was also trying to do something that was very difficult and ultimately lost her life. And that really resonated with me, because in a weird way, I was doing the same thing she was doing, except I was doing it as a writer. I'm just saying that struggle and that poverty actually made me more sensitive and more compassionate and more in tune with the plight of certain victims in the true crime situation. Reeva being a prime example. Another good example was Meredith Kircher. I could really identify with what she went through. Let's just have a look at some of your comments. Stephanie says, he finds such joy in his nephew, the time they did spend together. Okay. Right, shall we go into the next letter? This one is 9 to 10 November. It's also super long. And I'll see how much I can get through. Let me just put a link to the letter in chat in case you don't have it. And this letter also starts off old boy. It says, I cannot make out from the letter father and mother received today what you think of my last two letters. So it says, but since you did not mention their receipt or enclose a letter for me, I suppose I shall soon get one from you. And in this case, I think it much better if you write after reading my 2, or including this one, my 3 letters, which, though written singly, complement each other, than if you had immediately answered the first one only. How cold and harsh my first letter must have sounded, and I suppose you must have thought me very obstinate and obdurate then. But was I wrong in this, and you will reproach me for not laying before you my most intimate and tender feelings, since you, O man of business, would have received them during your daily fever of affairs, when not exactly in the mood to appreciate love stories, so I thought. No, first we must awaken him, and only then sow the seeds of soft words in him. We must first prepare the soil for that man who hammers away at business. Therefore, the first letter was as cold as a plowshare. But as to the second, was I wrong in asserting that it would be more serious and more intimate? And now that we are speaking more intimately, we shall continue to. It's kind of a weird kind of self-conversation he's having, because his brother hasn't actually responded to him. Just kind of saying, can you see that I kind of had a strategy here? I started the first one quite blatantly, and then the second one was a little bit more detailed, and now I'm going to be very forthright with you. Meanwhile, his brother hasn't even responded. So he's kind of, in a way, responding to himself, thinking what his brother's thinking, and then it's kind of funny the way he's having this kind of this imagined dialogue, right? Then he says, but in the meantime, just another little bit of the plowshare. Here it comes. Though you have gone pretty far in the world without a she and no other, though you stand firmly in your shoes without a she and no other, though you know how to bring off business deals without a she and no other, though you are a man of willpower, energy, and character without a she and no other, though you have knowledge of men and experience without a she and no other, though you have high spirits, buoyancy, and courage without a she and no other, though you dare to take sides and hate halting between two opinions without. And then he sort of trails off there. It's quite poetic the way he's writing. And then he says, yet you will get further in the world, stand more firmly in your shoes, be a man of more willpower, energy, and character, obtain more knowledge of men and experience, have higher spirits, more buoyancy and courage, take sides more decidedly, be more averse to halting between two opinions, to wavering, oscillating, etc., than you have until now, as soon as you have somebody to whom she and no other then applies. In short, you'll be more yourself with an honestly meant and deeply felt she and no other than without the same. Now, I think what is really very significant here is the truth behind those words is that ultimately Theo's she and no other, Joe, is going to be the person that contains, holds, preserves, protects the archive, not only of these letters, but of Vincent van Gogh's art. It is going to end up being a woman, Theo, she, and no other, that is going to bequeath this legacy to the world. And it's going to kind of spin off movies, documentaries, books, and all the rest, right? It is thanks to a woman that Vincent van Gogh is kind of born into the world. His efforts ultimately end up kind of being washed onto a beach, and then that is all that he is able to do. His brother's efforts only go so far, and then he dies. It is ultimately a woman who takes everything that has been, all these efforts, and finds a way to deliver them, almost like allowing Vincent van Gogh to be born again in the world as a creative force, as a force of nature, right? And so I think it's quite ironic what he's talking about here and what is ultimately going to happen to his legacy in terms of this. And he's talking to Theo about it, but it's actually going to be Theo's wife that is going to play such a big role in his story. Karina says, how does that English saying go? Better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Vincent is struggling with the concept of love, in my opinion. Yeah, it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. That is the saying. My father also would say, faint heart never won fair lady. Anyway, then he goes on to say, this little bit of the plowshare is still going on. Don't get cross at it. Your letter to father was rather melancholy, and to tell you the truth, I did not understand it and did not know what to make of it. Is there anything serious, yes or no? And some expressions astonished me. First, because it was you who used them, and second, because you wrote them to father and mother. So he's a little bit upset with his brother's position on himself, I guess. For you, more than anyone else, keep all your grande et petit misère de la vie humaine to yourself. I don't know what that is exactly, but I guess it's your big and small miseries in terms of the human condition to yourself, I guess. And if you did speak about them, it would be those whom you knew to be strong in the things in which you might feel more or less weak. I believe that if you felt yourself weak in anything, you would only confess that weakness to something whom you knew would be able to cure you of it. I don't know if I'm going to read all of this, because you can kind of just imagine a 28-year-old Vincent van Gogh scribbling feverishly. You know, he's not able to write to Kivos. He can't write to his uncle. And so it's almost like his only option is to write these feverish, frantic, frenetic letters to his brother, hoping that somehow all of those words are going to sort of circle back and circle through to his parents and somehow improve his situation. Of course, that isn't how it turns out. Anyway, he says, I thought this is a very impressive resolve, though. Indeed, I was far from sympathizing with it. I know only too well that my need for sympathy has often induced me to seek it from people who, instead of strengthening, unnerved me. Father and mother are very good at heart, but have little understanding of our inner feelings, and as little comprehension of your real circumstances as of mine. They love you especially, and we both, I as well as you, love them very much indeed. But alas, in many cases, they cannot give us practical advice. So he's touching on the generation gap. He's saying they just don't understand who we are, me and you. He says, it is not their fault, but the difference in age and the difference in opinion and the difference in circumstances. But that our home is and will remain our resting place, come what may, and that we must appreciate it and on our side, respect that home. There I quite agree with you, though perhaps you did not expect such a candid declaration from me. However, there is a resting place better, more necessary, more indispensable than our home with our parents, however good, however necessary, however indispensable it may be, and that is our own hearth and home with our respective she and no other. There you are, O man of business, closing profitable deals, your biggest deal, your own home with your own she and no other. In my opinion, this is the point you would do well to bear in mind. With the stimulant which more than any other tonic will keep alive your courage, strength, energy, and love of life, and renew them more and more every day. Some expressions in your letter of today induce me to say, now, suppose there might be some special reason why you should be more than ever on the qui vive and act more energetically and intelligently. Suppose they try to undermine your position, or there is some other trouble or moment of danger. Do not forget you are 26 and in a season of renewal, closing the biggest deal of your life. Renew yourself radically by being principally on the qui vive, in that you look at girls more seriously and attentively and be very careful to find out if your she and no other is not among them. That is the end of the plowshare. You remember perhaps that this summer we spoke about women, both with a kind of desolation that we felt or thought we felt. La femme est la désolation du juste, which I guess means I'm feeling a sense of desolation in terms of women. It's not fair. I don't know if that's accurate. Then he says, and I felt perhaps you did too, rather like Monsieur le Juste above. I'm not able to decide whether this saying is true or untrue, because since the summer I've begun to doubt if I ever knew distinctly blah, blah, blah. And I've resolved to examine these two problems. The result being that I often say to myself, it's more French, but it translates to, you don't yet know what a woman is. You don't yet know what a just man is, except that you aren't one yet for sure. All of which is quite different from my opinion of the summer. Not I, but Father Michelet says to all young men like you and me, a woman must breathe on you for you to be a man. She has breathed on me, dear chap. On the other hand, must a man breathe on a woman for her to be a woman? I most certainly think so. It's quite an interesting point. So, man of business, there is a love story for you. Do you think it very dull and very sentimental? When I had firmly resolved not to leave her, even if it should arouse her displeasure at first, not to turn away from her, when I clung only to that she and no other, then I felt a certain calm and firmness come over me. Then my melancholy left me. Then all things became new for me. Then also my energy increased. I know there are persons who think I ought to resign myself and that it is against the rules not to consider myself beaten. But if they say of my proposal this summer, if you sing before breakfast, you will cry before night, then you know the verse. He lost his feather in a fight, but knew they'd grown again all right, far finer than before. Well, it's a long letter. It goes on and on and on and on. He says, however, now it is one of the little miseries of human life for me that I cannot go to see her once in a while or write to her, and that some people who might have had a good influence in undermining that never, no, never, on the contrary, feed that never, no, never. I wish that she found no sympathy anywhere for her never, no, never, and that everyone would join in efforts to bankrupt the never, no, never. That they would quite reduce it to a warning monument for other never, no, never, saying, ladies, and for the encouragement of those who say, Amer encore, but we have not come that far. I should like it very much if you could persuade father and mother to be less pessimistic. And well, he's really coming out and saying it, isn't it? Isn't he? He's saying, I'd like it if you can just persuade dad and mom to be less pessimistic in terms about me and to have more courage and humanity, for they are awfully pessimistic and call what I did this summer premature and indelicate. Till I requested them quite firmly and definitely not to use such expressions anymore. A word from you perhaps influences them more than anything I can say, and it would be so much better for them as well as for me to let me go my way quietly. They want me to stop all correspondence, for instance, with uncle and aunt. Of course, I cannot promise such a thing. And even if I did stop writing a while, I would certainly start again with new vigor later. So this is kind of like his own parents that are sort of blocking and unfriending, in the social media sense. You will not write to those people, kind of thing. And also, I guess, Kivos is kind of saying unfriend kind of thing. They want me to stop all correspondence with uncle and aunt, of course. Okay, so then he says, she refuses to read my letters, but, three buts, but the frost and the winter cold are too bitter to last very long. So he's saying he kind of expects her resistance to crumble eventually. Well, he's wrong. But what is important here is the kind of fellow that he is very emotional, he's very intense, and he can be kind of an unwelcome, his attentions can be unwelcome, and even when they are, he doesn't necessarily stop or give up. He's not this sort of shy, retiring wallflower. He's quite a abrasive force in a way. If you had the bad luck for Vincent van Gogh to fall in love with you, you might have a little bit of a problem on your hands, kind of thing. And I want you to think about that in the context of Marguerite Gachet. Did he notice her and start feeling inappropriate feelings towards her? And then did she say no, never, never, no, never as well? And he was like, wow, I think that we've got a chance here, kind of thing. He says, I think it much more natural and sensible that when I spoke to her for the first time about these things, she had once uttered that never, no, never so energetically. So, I don't know, somehow he sees that as a positive, that almost immediately when he expressed his feelings, she said, never, no, never. And he's saying, well, I actually see something quite positive in that she's so energetic about that. That very thing convinces me that there was some fatal disease, and I hope I've touched the core of the fatal disease of burying herself too much in the past. Now a crisis of indignation follows, but the surgeon laughs up his sleeves and says, touché. This is just between ourselves, however, Theo. She must not know that I laughed up my sleeve over the result of the knife's thrust. Toward her, I am, of course, more or less repentant. Did I hurt you? Oh, how brusque and rough I was. How could I be so? That is my attitude toward her. A very repentant and humble letter to uncle, but still I told him she and no other. You will not betray me, brother. To act as if nothing had happened between us is all nonsense and humbug. None of that. Boy, I am so glad with my never, no, never. He's saying he's actually encouraged by it. He is happy. I I should like to shout with glee, but I must not show it, and must attack her again in some other way. But how to approach her, how to come near her, I must do it some day quite unexpectedly and take her unawares. For if I do not stick with it, then the fatal evil of burying herself in the past will come back with sevenfold strength. Anyway, he goes on to say, now I've been complaining a little bit about father and mother. Bear in mind, he lives with his parents. He's sort of writing to his brother, almost to have them have him write to them to try and change their hearts or minds. He's trying to, it's kind of an influence campaign. Jean Karras, thanks for joining us. Whew, if all of these letters are so long, it's going to be a long time to get through November 1881. Anyway, he goes on to say, I'm just going to go a little bit further down the paragraph. He says, I would rather they could understand more of my thoughts and opinions on many things. Theirs is a system of resignation in many matters to which I cannot resign myself. Now I think a letter from you speaking lightly about that never no never would perhaps be very effective. So he's asking his brother to minimize Kivos's never no never. One word from mother this summer would have given me the opportunity of saying many things to her which could not be said in public. But mother very decidedly refused to say that word. On the contrary, she cut off every opportunity for me. Yeah, I've only got this much water left. I've already gone through this glass. So yeah, it's not looking good. There's more words than glasses of water to facilitate them. He goes on to say, and she came to me with a face full of pity and with many comforting words, and I'm sure she had prayed a beautiful prayer for me, that I might receive strength for resignation. But until now, that prayer has found no hearing. On the contrary, I've received strength for action. You understand that a man who wants to act cannot quite approve of the fact that his mother prays for his resignation, and that he's kind of seeing the horrible irony of his own mother trying to tell her son, dude, she doesn't like you, it's not going to work, kind of thing. And that he also thinks her words of comfort a little out of place as long as he does not despair. But on the contrary, he says from the bottom of his heart, I won't accept the yoke of despair. I wish she had not prayed for me and had given me the chance of having an intimate conversation with her. And instead of agreeing with that never, no, never, she might have taken my part with a little more sympathy when Key spoke to her in confidence and poured out her heart to her. I tell you these things to convince you that an energetic word from you to father and mother would be of great help to me. So he keeps appealing to Theo. Please say something to help my case. And in a way, your heart's kind of got to go out to him because Kivos is probably the last sort of decent woman that he develops feelings for. There is a woman that he, I think, is attracted to in Paris. She's a restaurant keeper, but arguably Kivos was probably the most suitable candidate. And so when, in a way, when she slips from his grasp, when he accepts defeat, it's kind of like it's going to be all downhill from there. He's not really going to ever meet someone from his class. So in a way, it is quite sad, in a way. What's a good point Stephanie makes, only the best candidate if reciprocated. So, I mean, she isn't reciprocating, and so that's a fact. I'm just saying, if it had worked out, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying once this passes, it's just really downhill from there. And that in a way is unfortunate. One wonders if if you could just wave a magic wand and let's say, for whatever reason, he did have a short relationship with her. Let's say it didn't work out. Let's say they had a brief relationship. Obviously, in those times, I don't think you could have those sort of relationships, but let's just say they could. He may have, I don't know, developed the confidence to approach other women in that class kind of thing. Whereas I think the lesson he learned was, I'm not good enough. And so he kind of, he went from kivas to basically to prostitutes. I think he lost a lot of confidence, I think, which is kind of a shame, but it also kind of seems inevitable, doesn't it? He goes on to say, since I really love, there's more reality in my drawings, and I sit writing to you now in the little room with quite a collection around me of men, women, and children from the hiker, etc. Mauve is ill, but father and mother have invited him to come here to recover as soon as he can undertake the journey. Adieu. Write soon, a handshake in thought. Believe me, ever yours, Vincent. So now we go from 9 to 10 November to 10 to 11 November. Geez, this is going to be, how long is this letter? This is a really long letter as well. Very, very long letter. And it's obviously all about the same thing. Next letter, 12th of November. Next letter, 12th of November. Next letter, 18th of November. Next letter, 18th of November. Next letter, 19th of November. Next letter, 21st November. 23rd November, 23rd November, and then December. Well, I don't know if we're really even going to make it out of this year. 1st to 3rd November, 18th November, 21st December. I don't think we're even going to make it out of this year. Well, let's see how they go. I don't know if I'm going to read, if it's like just love letters and whatever. I don't know if I'm going to read all of them. So this is obviously a letter that he writes to Theo once Theo's written back to him. Yvonne Phillips, good to see you. Sorry for lateness, but glad to be here. Not there yet, says, I agree. I think that that was his mother's intent. Okay. Okay, so this is a letter from Vincent to Theo, 10 to 11 November. Dear brother, I have received your letter, but think it is only an answer to my number one, meaning his first letter. In number 2 and number 3, you will have found a talking to as my thanks for your advice. Take care not to build too many castles in the air before you are sure the work is not in vain. And since you have had that talking to already, I shall not repeat it. Much good it may do you, old boy. It's lucky at any rate that you haven't been guilty of, in the meantime, thinking. Isn't that so? No, neither you nor I are guilty of that sort of thinking, to the best of our belief, yours and mine. Someone who lacks courage or uses a won't commit myself approach, or doesn't dare stake his life with a smile, would be better off not even trying to win a real woman's heart. So what's quite interesting in these letters is there's virtually no references to God or Bible verses. Remember, there were letters that were just about the Bible and biblical themes. Then there's also virtually no references whatsoever to painting. These letters are only kind of referring to love, right? That's kind of what is taking over his thought process at this point. Then he says, from the very beginning of this love, I've felt that unless I threw myself into it, unreservedly, committing myself totally and with all my heart, utterly and forever, I had absolutely no chance. That even if I do throw myself into it in this way, the chance is very slight. But what do I care if my chance is great or small? I mean, can I take that into account when I'm in love? No, no reckoning up. One loves because one loves. Being in love, what a business! Exclamation mark. Imagine what a real woman would think if she found that someone was courting her with reservations. Wouldn't she say something worse than never, no, never? That is, I don't know, I find that really quite funny. Let me just put that in chat. I just think that is pretty unbelievable. Let me read that again. Imagine what a real woman would think if she found that someone was courting her with reservations. Wouldn't she say something worse than never, no, never? Anyway, I guess he's a glass full kind of guy when it comes to love. Anyway, he says, "Oh, Theo, don't let's talk about it. If you and I are in love, then we are in love. Voila, that's all there is to it. And we keep a clear head and do not becloud our mind, nor curb our feelings, nor douse the fire and the light, but simply say, thank God I'm in love." Again, imagine what a real woman would think of a lover who came to her confident of success. I wouldn't give tuppence for his chances with someone like Kivas, and not for 100,000 guilders would I swap his chances for that no, never, ever. I sent you a few drawings because I thought you might find something of the look of Heike. That's a town near Etten in North Brabant, also called St. Willebroord. So there's a rare reference to some artwork. He said, now tell me, please, why don't they sell and how can I make them sellable? So I think he's got a bit of a sense of urgency that he wants to sell his art because he's trying to impress a girl, right? That's another thing that's a little bit unfortunate in terms of him not having a relationship that works out. If he was in a relationship with someone, that someone would have kind of put pressure on him directly and indirectly, like, okay, so you're an artist, have you sold anything? Okay, so you're an artist, how long has it been since you sold something? Okay, you're an artist, when are you going to sell something that you painted? Prove your worth. And I can tell you, whatever work ethic Vincent had, if he was in love, it would probably go up 10-fold, 100-fold, or whatever, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Anyway, he says, for I should like to earn some money now, and then for the fair, to go and look into that never, no, never. So he wants to sell some of his art so that he can get some money and use that to, I'm not quite sure what he means by look into that never, no, never. I don't know whether it means visit her or write to her or something else. But be sure not to mention this plan of mine to the most reverend and very learned Mr. JPS. So he's kind of been quite sarcastic here. Johannes Paulus Stricker, Uncle Stricker, the father of Key. For when I do arrive entirely unannounced, so he is planning on actually showing up, very stalkerish. He says he might perhaps have no alternative but to turn a blind eye for the sake of peace. Maybe not a good idea. Then he says, someone like the most reverend and very learned Mr. JPS becomes quite a different person from what he was before, once one falls in love with his daughter, at least as far as the one involved in the present case is concerned. He becomes quite gigantic and assumes unheard of proportions. But that does not alter the fact that as one who loves his daughter, one is more afraid of not going to him than of going to him, even though one knows that he's capable of doing terrible things in the circumstances. He's really playing thought games with himself. Anyway, right now I can't help feeling I have a draftsman's fist, and I'm very glad that I have such an implement, even though it is still unwieldy. The Ingress paper is really excellent. So a little bit of reference to his art. And then he says, and so you are popularly known as a lucky dog. And you are not sure whether you really are one or not, but why should you doubt it? Now, look, what I should like to know is this: what sort of petite misère do you have? I know some of them in part or in full, others I don't. Do you also have petite misères to do with a lady from time to time? Of course you do, but I should like to hear what they are. So now it's kind of inviting his brother to share some of his, I guess, private experiences, his private knowledge, his private life, some of the intimate details. Then he says, surely none of the never know never sort, or perhaps on the contrary, too many heavy-handed yeas and amens. Well, your petite misères with the ladies interest me exceedingly, especially because I think of your petite misères what I think of my own, namely that in many cases we do not quite know how to take them when, in fact, they contain hidden treasure, provided we know how to find and take possession of it. The petite or grand misères are riddles. Finding the solution is well worth the trouble. A lucky dog who complains without reason, and they call me the melancholy one. And I ask you to congratulate me on my never no never. And I get very cross when people tell me that it is dangerous to put out to sea, observing that one might drown in it. I don't get cross because I think they're wrong to say that, but because they seem to forget that there is safety in the very heart of danger. So, you lucky dog, what is wrong with your luck? You were able to tell me with much piquancy what falling in love is like by your comparison with a strawberry. So he's referring to, Sharon says, I don't recall Vincent being sarcastic before. But he's obviously quite ardent, isn't he? She says, it was nicely put indeed, but to be in love in the teeth of a triple no, never, ever, as well as of a most reverend and very learned Mr. JPS, who makes inquiries about the means of existence in the present case. The present case obviously refers to him, as his reverence calls it. So it's quite funny when this pastor, who's his uncle, refers to Vincent, he calls him the present case, right? I must say that is an aspect that I think is maybe underestimated here. I think it is an issue that Kivos is his cousin, but I think another issue is he's kind of in this minefield of piety. His father is a pastor, his uncle is a pastor, and there's like this, this very rigid religious thing that is trying to codify his behavior, and it's got to feel quite oppressive, right? And you know how it sometimes is when you are a young person, when an authority figure says no in terms of a love affair, it almost makes it too hard to pass up. It almost makes it, there's like a rebellion that sets in, right? Anyway, it goes on to say, his reverence does not even make inquiries about them because he, being into the bargain a Philistine when it comes to art, thinks that they are non-existent. To be in love like that, I say, is not quite like picking strawberries in the spring. And that never, no, never is not balmy as spring air, but bitter, bitter, bitter as the biting frost of winter. This is no flattery, Shakespeare would say. And I think that comes from As You Like It. However, Samson said something else. Out of the strong came forth sweetness. And the question, remember Samson and Delilah. And the question is very much whether Samson was not much wiser than I am. Proudly he seized hold of a lion and overpowered him. But could we do the same? You must be able to, Samson would have said, and rightly so. Enough, the strawberry season has not yet arrived. I can indeed see the strawberry plants, but they are frozen. Will spring arrive and thaw them out? And will they come into bloom? And then who will pick them? Still, that never, no, never has taught me things I did not know. Number one, it has brought home to me the enormity of my ignorance. And two, women have a world of their own and much more. Also, that there are such things as means of existence. I should think it more considerate of people if they said, as the Constitution says, every man is considered innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, so now is elevating this to almost a legal battle, is basically saying, cheapers, guys, innocent until proven guilty. Allow me the chance to love this woman, and then I'll be innocent until proven guilty. He said that it should be assumed that others have the means of existence until the contrary is proved. It could be said, this man exists, I see him, he speaks to me. A proof of his actual existence is even that he's not uninvolved in a certain case. For example, the present case. His existence being clear and obvious to me, since I'm aware that the person in question is not a mere ghost, but is made of real live flesh and bones. I shall take it as axiomatic that he owes that existence to me, to means, I guess it should be to mean, he obtains in some way or other and for which he works. So I shall not suspect him of existing without any means of existence. However, that is not the way people reason, least of all a certain person in question in Amsterdam. They have to see the means in order to believe in the existence of the person in question. But the existence of the person in question does not prove to them that he has means. Well, this being so, we are obliged to hold up a draftsman's fist, though not to attack or even to threaten them with it. Then we must use that getting so tongue-tied. Yeah. Then we must use that draftsman's fist as best as we can. But the no never ever riddle is still by no means solved in this way. Trying the direct opposite of certain pieces of advice can often prove practical and do one good. So there you have it, him being very rebellious. It's like they give him advice, don't do this, and now he's going to do the opposite. He says that is why it is in many cases so useful to ask for advice. Okay, I'm going to put that in chat as well. It's kind of priceless. It's not all going to fit in there. Okay, let me read that again. But the no, never, ever riddle is still by no means solved in this way. Trying the direct opposite of certain pieces of advice can often prove practical and do one good. That is why it is in many cases so useful to ask for advice. But some pieces of advice can be used in their natural state and do not need to be turned inside out or upside down. This latter kind is very rare and desirable, however, for it still has some special characteristics. The former kind thrives everywhere in profusion. The latter sort is expensive. The former costs nothing and is sometimes delivered unsolicited to one's home by the sackful. In the meantime, and then 3 exclamation marks. Yours truly, Vincent. I close this letter with some advice of my own. If ever you fall in love, do so without reservation, or rather, if you should fall in love, simply give no thought to any reservation. Moreover, when you do fall in love, you will not feel certain of success beforehand. You will be a lost soul, and yet you will smile. Whoever feels so sure of his ground that he rationally imagines she is mine, even before he has waged the soul's battle of love, even before, I say, he has become suspended between life and death on the high seas, in the midst of storm and tempest. There is one who knows little of what a woman's heart is, and that will be brought home, I think should be brought home to him by a real woman in a very special way. When I was younger, one half of me once fancied that I was in love. One half of me fancied that I was in love, and with the other half, I really was. The result was many years of humiliation. Let me not have been humiliated in vain. I speak as one who has been down from bitter experience, from learning the hard way. Lucky dog, what's the matter? What aileth thee? Perhaps after all you have not been such a lucky dog so far, but I think you are well on the way to becoming one. That much I gather from the tone of your letters. It was just as if there is a small lump in your throat, in your voice. What kind of small lump is it? Could you not tell me for once, now that I have told you so much? Theo, every girl's father has something called a key to the front door, a very terrible weapon which can open and shut the aforesaid door as Peter and Paul open and close the gates of heaven. Well, does that implement also fit the heart of the respective daughters in question? Can that be opened or shut with a key to the front door? I think not. God and love alone can open or close a woman's heart. Will hers open? Brother, will she ever let me in? God knows. I cannot tell such things in advance. Father and mother promise not to oppose this, if only I leave them out of the matter, as it were. Quite deep. Definitely quite deep. So, if anything, what these letters show is a very intense young man. And I think what is quite sad is you've got to imagine that he ultimately, after this, remember at this point he's 28 years old. So for the next 9 years, he will have relationships with women, but it'll be very kind of unpleasant relationships. It'll be with far more unsuitable women than his cousin, right? And just think about the kind of person Vincent van Gogh is in terms of his intelligence, his sensitivity, his upbringing, and imagine how hard it must be to have a deep and proper conversation, an intimate conversation with a woman who's, let's say, a prostitute. Can a prostitute talk to him about art, about culture, about certain things? And so how fulfilling, how meaningful are his dalliances going to be with the people that follow? And I would imagine quite fulfilling, perhaps in the sexual sense, but very unfulfilling kind of in the emotional sense, in the sense of a true companion, as a sort of a soulmate. And that's possibly why someone like Marguerite Gachet, a young woman, an attractive woman, but someone who's obviously very cultured, the daughter of a doctor, and also doesn't have a mother as like a hen figure protecting her daughter from him, and her father's out in the city. You can kind of imagine a situation like that where Vincent's been denied access to the sort of woman that he wants to be with, and then when he finds someone who is well brought up, you can see how powerful that sense of attraction could be. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, so now we got a letter from Vincent to Anton van Rappard, 12th of November, 1881. Let's see how much he talks about his love life. It's quite a long letter. This is a super long letter as well. It's a super long letter as well. I may have to do an extra 2 or 3 Van Gogh letters to get through all of this. So I may not do a 3-hour tonight just because this is almost finished. But I don't want to skip through this because I think it's quite powerful writing from him. But at the same time, I'm not going to do 4 or 5 hour sessions. So I might do an extra one on Thursday. I might do 3 a week instead of 2 a week until we get through this period. What do you guys think of that? All my water's finished. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Stephanie says, yes, it is powerful. Yvonne says, Vincent is such a deep person, but he struggles to find his match. I think that's part of the reason. The other part is that he doesn't have money, doesn't have means. That's always going to be a difficult, so he's intellectually quite sophisticated, but he's poor. And so it's quite hard to find a woman who's his match intellectually and doesn't mind that he's poor, kind of thing. Stephanie says he comes to life in his letters and Nick gives him his voice. Well, my voice, it feels like he's taking away my voice. Yeah, a water cooler beside the desk. Well, I didn't really realize that all of these letters are so long. But yeah, I guess he's got a lot to say. Anyway, let's go on to the next letter. From Vincent to Anton van Rappard, also from Etten, written just the next day. Dear Rappard, not having received any letter from you up to today, I thought probably Rappard did not like my last letter at all. There seems to have been something in it that made him peevish. Que faire? Suppose this was so, do you really think it nice of you? Speaking for myself, I cannot always quite make out whether my reasonings are right or wrong, proper or improper. But this much I know, that however roughly or harshly I may express myself toward you, I have such a warm sympathy for you that on quietly reading or rereading my letter, you will see and feel the person who speaks that way to me is not my enemy. And knowing this, it is quite impossible for you to hear with me and even swallow some expressions that are a little rough or harsh, which perhaps later on will prove to be less rough and harsh than you thought in the beginning. Now, I must say the feeling I get is he really if he could have his way, he would be writing these letters to Kivos. That's what he would really like to be doing. So he's swept up with emotion, and at the same time, there's a big wall in front of him, and he can't get released. He can't share what he feels with the person that it's directed towards. And so in a weird way, he's directing this towards other people, right? Can you imagine if they did allow Vincent to write to Kivos and she wrote back, we would then have those letters as well? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if his parents, for whatever reason, allowed him to write these letters? Those letters would be part of this archive. And what would he say, right? So in a sense, it's quite a shame that barrier was placed there. Rappard, why do you think I speak and write to you as I do? Is it because I want to lay snares for you? Because I'm a sort of tempter who wants to make you fall into a pit? Or is it possible that I had a sound reason for thinking Rappard is taking a chance on very slippery ice? Oh, I well know that there are people who not only stay on their feet on the most slippery ice, but can even perform tours de force on it. But even if you were standing as firmly on your feet as all that, and I'm not saying you aren't, yet I would rather see you marching on a footpath or a paved road. Please don't get angry. Read on to the very end. If you get angry, if you do get angry, don't tear up this letter without reading it. First count to 10. 1, 2, 3, and so on. Is really overthinking these letters, isn't he? Anyway, he goes on to say, that's tranquilizing, for you know now there follows something dreadful indeed. What I want to say is this. Rapport, I believe that though you are working at the academy, you are trying more and more to become a true realist, and that even at the academy you will stick to reality. However, without being conscious of it yourself, without knowing it, this academy is a mistress who prevents a more serious, a warmer, a more fruitful love from awakening in you. Let this mistress go and fall desperately in love with your real sweetheart, Dame Nature or reality. And he uses that as and it's quite sly in a way, but he uses that as a precursor to introduce his own actual love affair. So he says, I fell in love the same way too, desperately, I tell you, with a certain Dame Nature or reality, and I felt so happy ever since, though she is still resisting me cruelly and does not want me yet, and often raps me over the knuckles when I dare prematurely to consider her mine. What is he talking about here? Is he talking about Kivos or trying to paint nature? He says, consequently, I cannot say that I've won her by a long shot, but what I can say is that I'm wooing her and that I'm trying to find the key to her heart, notwithstanding the painful raps on the knuckles. But never think that there's only one woman called Dame Nature or reality. No, it is only the family name of many sisters with different Christian names. So we need not be rivals. Is this clear to you, my friend? Of course, it is meant in a purely artistic sense, you know. Is it? Is it meant in a purely artistic sense? I was just looking at the footnote there. Where was I? Okay. Now, in my opinion, there are two kinds of mistresses. There's the kind whom you may love and be loved by, all the time being aware that on one side or on both it is nothing permanent, and that you do not surrender yourself completely, unconditionally, and without reservation. I think he's talking there about sort of prostitutes. He says, there's the kind of mistress that you may love and be loved by, all the time being aware that on one side or on both it is nothing permanent. Then he says, such mistresses enervate one, they flatter and spoil one, and then they scorch the wings of quite a number of men. The mistresses of the second kind are of an entirely different variety. These are women of marble, sphinx-like, frozen vipers, who would like to fetter men completely once and for all. However, without on their part surrendering themselves unconditionally and without reservation, they are bloodsuckers, these mistresses. They freeze men and petrify them. So he has a little bit of a sense of the dark side of his affection coming out, the dark side of his love being unrequited. There's a bit of a bitterness, a bit of anger. Then he says, but I told you, old fellow, this is only meant in a purely artistic sense. And so I compare the first kind of mistress, those who scorch, to that school in art which lapses into vulgarity. And I compare the other kind of mistress, those who freeze and petrify, to the academic reality, or if you want me to quote the pill, to the unacademic reality, more sugar won't stick to the pill. And I'm afraid you can look through the thin layer. The pill is bitter, but very healthy. It is quinine. Have you understood this, old fellow? Now there are, thank God, others besides these two kinds of women. They form that family of dames, nature, and reality, but it takes a severe mental struggle to win one of them. They demand nothing. They demand nothing more nor less than the entire surrender of the heart, the soul, and the mind. In a certain respect, all the love we have in us, and then they surrender themselves too. These dames, nature, though righteous as doves, are at the same time cautious as serpents, and they know quite well how to distinguish those who are sincere from those who are false. She renews, she refreshes, she gives life. this dame nature, this dame reality. Rapport, there are people, and perhaps you and I belong among them, who only when they are really in love realize that before that time they have had mistresses of either variety, consciously or unconsciously, who at any rate are not acquainted with both species. Yeah, Yvonne says the frustration. Nisi says bitterness. Jealousy says madness. Okay. Therefore, I tell you, my friend, you must tear yourself from the arms of this woman of marble, or is it plaster of Paris, or you will freeze to death. Meanwhile, remember, if I be a tempter digger, if I be a tempter digging a deep pit for you to fall into, that pit may well be a well wherein truth dwells. And that's that. Never more sound the praises of any unacademic mistress to me, speaking artistically. In my opinion, she's a shrew. Old fellow, I think she will cheat you if you let her capture you. Let her go to the devil, drive her away on the double. But listen, this is meant purely in the artistic sense, old fellow. He keeps saying that, but I don't know whether I believe it. He keeps saying, I mean this in the artistic sense. He's not really talking about actual paintings that he's doing. So one wonders whether he's not what he's actually trying to get at. Anyway, he says, oh, well, if there's anything over and above this, that is another matter. Even so, I shan't take back my words, though I should like to take my own words in a non-figurative sense. Do you understand, old fellow? And say you will now write to me without loss of time. So what I find very interesting about this letter is how strangely cryptic it is and how strangely symbolic it is. And I believe that what you see in this particular letter echoes later on in his life. There's a time when he's writing to Gauguin after the ear incident, where he's similarly cryptic, right? Where he dances around the subject matter. It feels like he wants to talk to Rappard the way he talks to his brother, but then he just doesn't quite get to that. He's trying to approach the subject, but then he doesn't quite get there. And so he's quite cryptic about it. He has the same style when he writes to Gauguin. So remember me mentioning it here, because it is a feature of Vincent van Gogh where he seems to be writing symbolically in a way that's not clear, and it seems to be kind of indirect. In other words, he's trying to say something without saying it. He's trying to put the seed into your mind, right? Then he says, a handshake and believe me, ever yours, Vincent. Then he says, recently I made a drawing, lunch hour, a laborer resting and drinking his coffee and cutting a slice of bread. On the ground, a spade with which he returned from the field. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of this. Although the postscript is pretty long. It's a really, really long postscript here. He actually signs off twice in this particular letter. Anyway, I'm not going to read all of it. In fact, I'm going to need to sign off pretty quickly. Okay, let's just have a look at some of your comments. Karina says, my postscripts are always too long. Stephanie says, nor can you buy it, especially under the circumstances of the brothels he is visiting. Okay, so let's go on to the next letter. How long is this one? Super, super long. So this may actually be the last letter or the second last letter. I can't actually believe that I haven't really gotten through even half of November. Anyway, okay, so here we go. Dear Theo, one sentence in your letter of November 6 requires a separate answer. You say, in the present case, I should not lose courage if I were you, but I would let the thing rest with regard to people whom it does not concern. I think this attitude will astonish those who now interfere, and it will disarm them. So something just again to bear in mind is a lot of what Vincent's saying is very idealistic and very, it sounds quite disarming in a way, but bear in mind 6 months from now he's going to have gonorrhea. So although he is this very ardent, dedicated young man, although he's kind of got this thing of, I will only ever love you, within 6 months he's going to have gonorrhea, and who knows where he got that from. And that is in a real sense how Van Gogh fluctuates. He can be have very, very strong feelings, and then and it's quite consistent for a while, and then it completely fluctuates or oscillates, right? And one of the areas where that didn't seem so much to be the case was his art. So his feelings towards God would come and go to an extent. His feelings towards certain women would come and go to some extent. But in terms of his art and his relationship with his brother, there definitely was a consistency there. So I don't think you can say he's like bipolar or totally bipolar. I think there is an aspect where he is very intense and then completely, there's a complete pendulum swing, but I don't think that's true completely with him. As I say, his art is consistent. His relationship with his brother is pretty consistent as well. It's not like everything is inconsistent. What's also interesting is his parents would actually try and have him committed to an asylum. They were so worried about him. They actually thought he was kind of going kind of a bit crazy. And the reality was that he was both very, very lonely, and then also within that context of being lonely, he'd found someone that he thought that he loved. And so he's also now very frustrated in his affection. And who wouldn't be, in that situation? Anyway, he says to his brother, it would have been new to me if I'd not already tried these tactics more than once before and found them one of the best weapons. Now, however, I can only say, yes, I knew as much, but now after that, what more do you know? For you must not forget that there are cases where it is not always sufficient to be on the defensive, especially when the strategy of the enemy is based on somewhat rash supposition that at the most I certainly cannot go any further than wait in a defensive attitude. Theo, if you were in love with the same sort of love as mine, and boy, why should you ever have another kind of love, then you would discover something quite new in yourself, such as you and I, who generally associate with men and who attend to business of some kind, you in a large way and I in a small. Well, we are used to doing most of our work with our brains, with a certain diplomacy, with a certain sharp calculation. But now fall in love and look, you will perceive to your astonishment that there is still another force that urges us on to action, and that is the heart, We are sometimes rather inclined to ridicule it, but the truth cannot be denied, especially when in love. One says, I do not go to my head to ask my duty in this case. I go to my heart. Now, I cannot believe that you would expect me to consider either my parents or her parents as persons who have nothing to do with it, etc. On the contrary, I cannot suppose that it would be superfluous to talk it over with them now and then, especially when, as is now really the case, their attitude is neither positive nor negative. That is to say, they do nothing openly for or against. I do not understand how they can bear this. Is it like being neither cold or warm? And that is always a miserable thing. Oh, how much precious time is perhaps lost in this way. If you would rather be counted among the persons whom it does not concern and with whom I should let the thing rest, then I would still talk to you about it now and then, even against your will, in exactly the same way as I do now with father and mother and uncle and aunt Stricker. When I spoke of it to father this summer, he interrupted me with an anecdote about somebody who had eaten too much and another who had eaten too little. It was quite inappropriate, and it was a story with no beginning or end, so that I thought, what's wrong with father? It was perhaps from nervousness, as he had not expected it, yet it was under his very eyes, so to speak, that she and I had walked together and spoken together for days and weeks. Now in this mood, are those eyes clear seeing? I think not. If I were hesitant, doubtful, halting between two opinions, I might agree with father's and mother's attitude, but now it is quite different. This, my love, has made me resolute, and I feel energy, new, healthy energy in me, just the way everybody else who really loves feels. So what I want to say, brother, is no more nor less than that. I firmly believe that any man is unconscious of some peculiar, great hidden force, deeply hidden in him, until sooner or later he is awakened by meeting someone of whom one says she and no other. It's quite personal, this, and it's quite personal to certain family members, especially the part where he says, yet it was under his very eyes, meaning his father's eyes, so to speak, that she and I had walked together and spoken together for days and weeks. Now in this mood, are those eyes clear seeing? I think not. So it seems as though Vincent and Kivos had quite a lot of time to hang around one another. And I think part of his love for her actually came from the companionship that he didn't know that he didn't have, in a way. I think it was such a powerful experience for him because out of nothing, right, out of this failure of his life and the loneliness of his life up until this point, he suddenly has this incredible access and familiarity and he probably even fondness. Maybe his cousin, because she's not threatened by him, certainly not at that point. She's unaware of what's going on. She's quite charmed by him, but he obviously sees a lot more into it than what she does, and he makes assumptions, right? But I'm just saying you can kind of understand how this could be quite a powerful experience for him, coming from the desolate, lonely, empty place that he was coming from, because it's not just that he meets somebody, it's someone that's a family member, and so there's a certain intimacy that's there from the beginning, an intimacy, a familiarity, and a friendliness, right? Hi, Robbie Robin, good to see you. I don't think I'm going to go on for much more than about 10 minutes, but let's just finish this letter. Then he says, if a man has more ambition and thirst for money than love, in my opinion, there's something wrong with him. If a man only has love and does not know how to earn money, there's something wrong with him also. It's quite a good point. It's quite a good point. Within us, ambition and greed are partners in their hostility to love. The germs of the two forces are inside all of us from the beginning. They develop later on in life, generally in unequal proportions. One is love, the other ambition and greed. But at our age, we, you and I, can do something to keep the things within us orderly. My opinion is that when it develops, when it comes to its full development, love produces better characters than the opposite passion, ambition and co. But just because love is so strong generally in our youth, I mean at 17, 18 or 20 years, we are not strong enough to keep it going straight. The passions are the little ship sails, and he who gives way entirely to his feelings in his 20th year catches too much wind and his boat takes in too much water and he sinks or comes to the surface again after all. On the contrary, he who hoists the ambition and co-sail and no other on his mast sails through life on a straight course without accidents, without wavering until at last, circumstances arise which make him think, I haven't enough sail. Then he says, I would give everything I possess for another square of sail, and I have not got it. He is in despair. But now he remembers that he possesses another power which he can use. He thinks of the sail which he has despised until now, which he had put away with the ballast, and it is this sail that saves him. Love's sail must save him. Without hoisting it, he cannot arrive. The first case, that of the man whose little boat capsized when he was 20 years old and sank, did it not? No, recently it came to the surface again. Is really that of your brother Vincent, who writes to you as one who has been down yet came up again? What kind of love was it when I felt when I was 20? It is difficult to define. So bear in mind when he went to London, I'm not actually sure if he's talking about, I think it's someone called Caroline, but he had there were two women that he was in love with. One was when he was in Paris, and one was when he was in England, neither of which worked out. Anyway, he seems to be referring to one of those here. He says, it is difficult to define. My physical passions were very weak then, perhaps because of a few years of great poverty and hard work. But my intellectual passions were strong, meaning that without asking anything in return, without wanting any pity, I wanted only to give, but not to receive. Foolish, wrong, exaggerated, proud, rash. For in love, one must not only give, but also take. And reversing it, one must not only take, but also give. Whoever deviates either to the right or to the left falls. There is no help for it. So I fell, but it was a wonder that I got up again. What helped me recover my balance more than anything else was reading practical books on physical and moral diseases. I got a deeper insight into my own heart and also into that of others. Gradually, I began to love my fellow men again, myself included, and more my heart and soul, which for a time had been withered, blighted, and stricken through all kinds of great misery, revived. And the more I turned and mingled with people, the more I felt new life reviving in me, until at last I met her. It is written, love thy neighbor as thyself. One can deviate to the right or to the left, but both are bad. I think all in exchange for all is the real true thing. This is it. And yeah, it is italicized. This is it. And yeah, it is italicized. And now the two extremes. First, to ask everything without giving. Second, to ask nothing but give everything. Two equally fatal bad things, both damned bad. Of course, there are people who advocate one or the other of these extremes. The first produces those members of society which we call rascals, thieves and usurers. I'm not sure if that should be usurpers, usurers. The second produces Jesuits and Pharisees, male and female, also rascals, If you tell me, take care that you do not get too fond of that never, no, never, and you mean by that, take care that you do not give all without taking anything, then you're quite right. My answer is, I made that mistake once. I gave up a girl and she married another, and I went away far from her, but kept her in my thoughts. Fatal. So that's quite a revelation. He feels like he made a mistake by giving up on another girl who was actually engaged. That was Eugenie in London. He says he gave up on her and then she married someone else. He let her go, and then he went far away, but he kept her nevertheless in his thoughts. So even though he'd left her and released her, she was still obviously in his heart. And he said that was kind of like a torture. Then he says, by now, grown wiser by experience, I say, I must try, if far from resigning myself, I cannot by strong patient energy achieve the result which will give me more satisfaction. I will use all my powers to thaw that never, no, never. So that's what's quite important to bear in mind here. It's not just Vincent being a bit of a lech, more than a bit of a inappropriate advance. In a way, he's trying to learn his lesson from a previous love that didn't go his way, and we felt I should have tried harder. I shouldn't have given up, and I don't know whether he's learned the right lesson from that. Maybe the lesson he needed to learn was play the field, love often, love deeply, but love often, love and let go, live and love often, kind of thing, or certainly more often than he was. Anyway, he goes on to say, Theo, in order to prove to you that I can reason quite calmly, though I am in love, I say to you, if she and I were sentimental and soft-hearted, then we could have married already and great misery would have come of it. Poverty, hunger, cold, illness, etc. But oh, it would still be better for us to be together than not to be together. So he's actually saying, if him and Key had actually married by this time, they might actually be quite miserable. They might not have money, etc., but that would actually be better than them not being together. But obviously, I think that's from his perspective. I would actually be interested to know what happened to Key Voss. Did she go on and marry somebody else? Did she go on to be a widow? What was the rest of her life? I'm not actually sure. Anyway, it goes on to say, if violent passion ruled me and she yielded to it, that passion would cool down. It talks about like the morning after the party, and there would be desolation and hers a broken heart. If she were a coquette and played with a man's heart, and the man did not see through a game, that man would be a fool, but a sublime fool, if a fool can be sublime. If I wanted her for other motives, money, for instance, or sensuality, and if I thought she cannot escape me for this or that reason, I would be the damnedest of all Jesuits and Pharisees. So that may be another aspect, which is that Key Voss has become a widow, and she's probably inherited money from her husband. And if Vincent had to marry her, he would then have access to that fortune, or certainly that kind of largesse, right? And I think that is contextually relevant. I don't know if he was thinking about that, but it's almost hard to imagine that wouldn't occur to him, because she would have her own life, her own home, and all he needed to do was just step into it, and it would be so easy to avoid the difficulties of assembling all of that given his station in life, if that makes sense. And I wouldn't be surprised if he did imagine just like stepping into her life and kind of taking over, kind of where her husband left off. Then he says, if we played it brother and sister, we would be acting like children and it would be quite out of place. If she never returned my love, I should probably stay a bachelor always. And that turns out sort of to be true. If I saw that she loved another man, I should go far, far away. If I saw that she took a man she did not love for his money, I should plead guilty to short-sightedness on my part. And I would say, I've mistaken a picture by Brochard for one by Jules Goupil, a fashion print for a figure by Bouton, Millet, or Tissot. Am I as short-sighted as that? But my eyes, like yours, well-trained and steady. But if she and I rise to a new life with renewed energy, then the future is no longer dark. So I just want to come back to that question that I asked previously. Do you think Vincent van Gogh is like a depressed, suicidal kind of person? Although his letters are certainly intense, that they are also very clear-minded. They're not hysterical, although there's some aspects to them that are amusing. But what I'm trying to say is, even in the midst of this feverish and fervent love, he's still pretty eloquent. He's still capable of expressing himself quite. There's lucidity in his ability to express himself, right? And bear in mind, he's writing this within that context of being rejected, and there's not a lot of negative emotion here. In a way, it's a lot lighter than one would kind of imagine, in a sense. Anyway, he goes on to say, if I had other motives when I proposed to her, she would have despised me, and now she does not despise me. But my third page is almost full, and I still have something to ask. Boy, I must see her face again and speak to her once more. If I do not do it soon, something will happen at the silver wedding which would perhaps do me great harm. Don't ask me to go into it. And if you were in love too, you would understand. Because you are not in love, I should not be able to make it clear to you. Theo, I want money for the trip to Amsterdam. If I have but just enough, I will go. Father and mother promise not to oppose this, if only I leave them out of the matter, as it were. Brother, if you send it to me, I will make lots of drawings for you of the hiker and whatever you want. And they would not get worse if the never no never began to thaw. So he's kind of saying, give me money, I'm going to go and see Kivos, and that's going to lead to my art improving. It's a little bit of a sly argument there. Then he says, for aimer encore is also the best recipe for dessiner encore. I'm not quite sure what that means. Could you help me with the money, boy? If it is only 20 francs, father will perhaps give me another 10. Leaving him out of it, pretending not to know. And then he says, and then I'll rush off at tremendous speed. You understand, old chap. Yours sincerely, Vincent. So in this letter, he's been kind of quite practical. He's kind of saying, please send me money. I've got to go and see her. And you've got to kind of wonder, what would you do under these circumstances? Your brother is begging you for money. Do you give him money? And bear in mind, this is going to end in disaster. And you let him meet disaster? Or do you just not give him money, and what do you do? What do you think happens? So the next letter is from the 18th of November, 1881, from Eton. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here. There's quite a lot of intensity in the next letter. He talks about father losing his temper, father being in anger, and so on. So things are still kind of boiling over, right? But I'm not going to take it further than this. I don't know, my voice is not in a good place. I'm feeling a little bit sort of run down. So I'm going to stop here, and I'll probably do the next one when. I'm not sure. We'll see. Okay, so Stephanie says, thanks for this impromptu Van Gogh meetup. Good to see you guys here. Nisi, Yvonne, Karina, Robbie Robin, Sharon Tuck, Ricardo, Hey Jealousy, Karina, and so on. Not there yet. Let's just have a look at the poll. How long does it take to develop symptoms of gonorrhea? I think all of the above is the right answer, and most of you've got that, 51%. It can be anything from 2 days to 2 years. So for all we know, at this point, Vincent actually already had gonorrhea, which is quite sad in a way. It's also possible that he didn't have it, but whether he did have it at this point or not, it does show that he is human after all, despite these very intense aphorisms and commitments. You know, the whole thing of she and nobody else, well, within a couple of months it would be somebody else, and someone that was kind of even worse. It's almost like the worst case scenario was the person that he chose, a pregnant prostitute with another child as well. And you can imagine Vincent can't even look after himself. Now he's trying to play the role of like a family man, like a husband to someone else's child, and this woman's pregnant with another child, kind of thing. So kind of crazy, isn't it? Okay, so that is it. At least I made it up to 2 hours. So we'll continue with Vincent's letter to Theo dated 18 November. This, I must say, has been a very tough month to get through because his letters are so long and so regular. Karina says, it was awesome to have been here with you and with Nick. Be well. May the force be with you. Margaret Zabinski says, good one. Yvonne, thank you very much, Nick and everyone. Not there yet. I'm staying after class for extra credit. Well, if you're staying after class, you might want to give this one a read if you're interested. Okay, thanks, guys. I'm going to be off. It's very cold here tonight. As I said, it's delicious monster downstairs. I've had to put in netting because it's going to be sub-zero tonight. And for the rest of the week, it's actually going to be very cold. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so I'm going to try and do a live tomorrow with Bria on the Summer Wells case. I'm not quite sure when, but likely a similar time to now if Bria is available. But anyway, we'll see. So I'll see you guys then. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.